Hi, I'm your host, Beth Renoff, and this is Are You Afraid of the Talk? Join me as I shine a light on the difficult conversations we keep in the dark. Follow the journeys of everyday people as they share their struggles with talking about different topics, from personal problems to societal issues. My hope is to get to the root of what holds people back from initiating these discussions and normalize these conversations by having them. So, are you afraid of the talk? Hi, and welcome to Are You Afraid of the Talk? I'm your host, Beth, and with me today is Jaclyn. Hi, Jaclyn.
Hey, good to see you.
Good to see you too. Why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself? I'd love for everybody to describe themselves so we can hear from you, get to know you a little better, see where your head's at. So Tell us.
Awesome. So my name is Jaclyn Michelle. I'm a Birth Chart Alchemist. So basically what I do is I use the tools of astrology, this thing called human design, this other system called the gene keys, basically as tools for self-inquiry and self kind of exploration and shadow work. So like what I help people do is look at the maps that are their birth charts to kind of really dig into like patterns they're maybe stuck in, or limiting beliefs they might have picked up along the way. So kind of digging into the why we are the way we are, and then trying to kind of rediscover our authentic selves along the way. So it's that kind of personal inquiry, using the astrology, using like the language of the stars and the cosmos.
I feel like that in itself would be a great topic, because like we all look at like CoStar and like our astrology, but we don't take it as far as to see like, well, what does it say about me? Is there any truth to it, right?
Yeah, I think we sometimes get stuck. Like of course my kind of gateway drug was like reading my horoscope in the back of Vogue when I was a kid and going like, what do the stars have for me this month? Like, I'm a Pisces, what does that mean? But there's so much more. Like once you start digging into like your rising sign, like your moon, and then like even deeper, like, okay, if your Saturn was in Scorpio during this time, like what were the themes of your Saturn return? Like all of a sudden it starts making like patterns in your life, and the cosmic weather start to make sense. And I think it just naturally leads to beautiful conversations about how we're wired and what feels aligned, and maybe where we're letting go of our power a little bit. So I've just always been a big like inquiry nerd. So it's like never enough to go like, here's what it is. I want to know the why and the how. Like we need to go deeper.
Right. Oh my God, I'm the same way. Like I need to know why everything happens.
Yeah. And it's so frustrating when there's not always an answer, but it's like, at least I can kind of, start the inquiry process.
Right. That's so interesting, and I love it. And I think we'll get to it a little bit later of how you even got there. But I love to start out with a little icebreaker just to like also see your personality and hear stories and like get to know you a little bit. So, have you ever met an idol or a celebrity, and how was it?
Oh, okay. So backstory. I grew up a big theater nerd. Like I was that kid. My dad took me to see Cats when it came, like the touring company came through Baltimore when I was a kid. And I like wanted to be the white cat. She had the best dance numbers. She had a great song. Like I was like, I was hooked. So I like was always at the library as a kid, like taking out musical scores. Like I had like cassette tapes of musicals I would just listen to on repeat. And I fell in love with the work of Bernadette Peters, who is Broadway icon, right? Like yes. I just was like I wanted to have the red curly hair. That was the other thing. Yes. Not only did she have like the voice of an angel, but like gorgeous red curly hair. She was vivacious. She was pretty. Anyway. So I'm living in New York City, and this is like obviously many, many moons later. Yeah. And I got invited to a party on the Upper West Side in this like really posh neighborhood, and like there's beautiful brownstones in the 70s on the West Side that's just gorgeous. And I'm walking down the street. It's like a perfect fall afternoon. And who walks out of a brownstone but Bernadette Peters? And I fangirled so hard. I stopped. I started crying, like big tears in my face. And I just went, oh my God, it's you. And she she just like, she was the sweetest. She just kept going on about their day, but she did kind of pause, say hi. Like, I think she said something like, hi, dear, and gave me a big warm smile, and then kept walking. And this is like the era, this is like the early aughts, right? Maybe it's like 2005, 2006. I don't know if she lived there. I don't know if she was visiting someone. I sat down on the steps of the nearest brownstone and pulled out my little like Nokia red, like, you know, dial the buttons phone and called my mom and just cried. I was like, I met her and she's beautiful and she knows that I'm a person in the world. And it was just like, anyway, it was magic. Like nothing tops that. I've had weird interactions with, because living in New York for a decade, you bump into people. Like I ran into Matt Dillon in a coffee shop, and like Ron Jeremy and I literally bumped into each other in Union Square once. Like I physically walked into him and I turned around and like, that's Ron Jeremy. That's a little weird. Anyway, so, but that was like the one that just like cracked my heart open. I was just like, oh, this angel on earth. Like we've locked eyes. We know each other existed. Anyway, so yeah, just it made my little nerdy fourth grade heart was just like, just so excited.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah.
I love that. I was like obsessed with her too. Like I was a big Annie fan, and I actually like, so when she was in that and Paper Moon, and I was a theater nerd as well.
Do you remember, I don't know if like this is your era, but like the fairy tale theater on PBS, where they used to do like, they would take Broadway icons and actresses and like retell fairy tales. Like she did an episode of that I was just like, it was like her, Carol Burnett, Ben Vereen. I was like such that kid that was just like, these people are so talented. So like, anyway, that was my like celebrity moment, was like,
yeah, that's so cool. I love that story, and I love that it was like a good experience, because I feel like people meet their idols or celebrities and they're like not nice.
Yeah.
It's like I'm happy it was like a good experience.
Yeah, like she was probably on her way somewhere. Like we didn't have again, it was like a 10-second interaction, but literally it was just like, okay, I can die now. I'm good. Like
That's amazing. Okay, so you love theater.
Yeah, it was my passion when I was a kid. Not as much anymore, but like, you know, not like I dislike it. It just isn't the same. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like some people just grow out of it. Like I wanted to be on Broadway. I wanted to act and sing, and then I think I got too cool for school, and I was like, but that's not like what cool people are doing. So, you know, you get wrapped up in that stupid mindset of I have to fit in. So, which kind of like, you know, segues into what you do is like, well, we're all unique and we're not all meant to do what everybody else is doing. But
exactly,
I digress. And so I guess what I love to talk about too, because this is all about talking about hard things, like what's something that's like easy for you to speak about. And
so I was listening to a couple of your past episodes and thinking about how I wanted to like answer this question. So like an easy topic for me now to talk about are things that like didn't used to be easy. What used to be easy for me to talk about, because I was definitely in a stage of like, you know, some deep shadow work I had to do on my own. Like I had a lot of issues with insecurity, like for the majority of my life. I was diagnosed with depression at a very young age. And what used to be kind of my default easy kind of conversation thing was I was really good at sensing what other people found entertaining or valuable and mirroring that back to them. So if you wanted me to be bitchy, catty, sarcastic, like cutting, like I could be that bitch, or I could be like warm and nurturing, or I could gossip with you. I really, for a very long time, was just so insecure and feeling like I had to constantly earn my place in the room, that for years, that was actually my default. It was really easy for me to kind of pick up vibrationally on like, okay, what does this person need from me? What do I need to give them in order to be valued, in order to be accepted? And a lot of times it was me telling like very self-deprecating stories, putting myself as the butt of the joke. You know, almost like I will call myself out on this thing before you can discover it and show you that it's okay and we can laugh about it so we can move past it and you can like me. So yeah, it was just so I was just interested as I was thinking about that because it used to be literally, it was just, what do you need from me? Like, I will give that to you. And in human design, one of the systems that I use, I found something in my chart that actually mirrored that. I have something called an open self center, and people with that center open in their chart do sometimes have these chameleon-like tendencies. And one of the questions that, like, when we're in what we call the not self of it, is like, how do I be what other people want me to be? Like, how do I mirror that back so I can like earn my acceptance in something external? Yeah.
It's like the ultimate form of people pleasing.
Oh God, yes, very much so. Yeah.
I mean,
I was going to say, it's easy to lose yourself along the way when you're constantly focused on like what other people find valuable. Like that was why I think for a really long time, I didn't know who I was outside of how I was, you know, perceived by groups of people or my job or, you know.
Mm-hmm. That's honestly, I think that is one of the biggest thing that people struggle with. I mean, I could tell you I did that. A lot of my clients do that. Like, I mean, as a therapist, you have to match anyway, so it actually was to my benefit. But like, I remember like losing myself in people and being like, but I didn't even feel like I wanted to be that way. I just felt like I had to.
Mm-hmm. I mean, even I was thinking back earlier about like dating even. Like for years when I would go out on a first date, it was almost like I was auditioning to play the part of girlfriend as opposed to even like figuring out, is this someone that I like? Is this someone I'm attracted to? Do we have things in common? Mm-hmm. It was just like, I felt like for years I was walking around with a big like blinking sign going like, please like me, please like me, please like me. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, it just, it was just constantly picking up on like, what do I need to mirror back? Like, how funny do I need to be? Or seductive do I need to be? Or smart do I need to be, like, to get you to value me?
Right. Oh, wow. I mean, again, we could talk a whole episode about that.
I know, right?
But that's so insightful, too. And I really like that answer because, like, my answer would probably be like family, friends, the weather. But like that's a really, really great answer. I love that.
Thank you. I've been doing so much of this kind of like shadow work is my jam. Like the things that I think are uncomfortable for some people to talk about, like the growth that I've experienced digging into my chart using human design and the gene keys, et cetera, in this way, like has come from having those really uncomfortable conversations with myself and starting to kind of normalize them, like in having them with other people and like experimenting with what vulnerability is like. And it was only through kind of digging back and peeling back the layers of like, well, that's not me and that's definitely not me. And where is that coming from? Mm-hmm. Like, and realizing where it was anchored in my chart and where, you know, yeah, it just kind of made me realize how much of myself I had outsourced, I think, to other people in a way that I think also was kind of manipulative. Like I was trying to basically like micromanage how I was perceived. And, mm-hmm. you know, it just, once I kind of realized like, oh, wow, I don't want to walk through the world trying to control other people. Like, I want to just mm-hmm. be who I am. And I have to figure out who she is again because, you know, yeah.
Can you define, because I think a lot of people don't know what shadow work is.
Mm-hmm.
So what in your definition would it be?
So my definition of shadow work has to do a lot with radical compassion. One of the things I love that you were talking about actually was in episode 7 with your guest was this idea of like the past is kind of over and we can't go back and rehearse it and, you know, regurgitate it. Like Monday morning quarterbacking, a lot of times, like I would find myself get stuck in those loops. But what I kind of like is, what I define shadow work is going into those times in your life where you've either enacted a pattern or, you know, created some sort of like situation maybe that didn't net out in the way that you wanted it to, and really having the honesty to go back and say, well, what was my part? And what was the thing that maybe I'm not proud of? Was I lying to myself? Was I believing something that maybe wasn't, you know, purposeful? Like really doing the self-inquiry to figure out where and why. And not to like self-flagellate and go, I'm such a fuck up, I'm so terrible, like, right. Oh, I'm horrible. Or to blame other people, because I think sometimes we can get looped. I always joke and call it the airing of the grievances, like the Festivus thing, where it's like, you did that, and I did this. It's like, it's not about assigning blame, it's more of just like, what can I learn? Like one of the things that kind of in my whole, I guess, like spiritual toolkit, one of the things that I've kind of internalized is like every experience you have as a teacher. And if you can go back and figure out what the lesson is. And shadow work is like doing that not just for the things that work, but for the things that didn't. And not denying any of the darker parts of yourself. Like, again, I was diagnosed with depression when I was, like 10 or 11 years old. It runs in my family. It's just hereditary, genetic, et cetera. And like, it's easy for me to get into a very dark space if I'm not careful. But I think there's a lot of beauty that we can find in that as well, because like you know, in the cycles of nature, like we can't have birth and generation without some sort of death and decomposition. It's this beautiful circle. And so it's not about denying and being love and light all the time. It's really trying to figure out, how do I integrate some of those parts of myself that maybe I want to hide? Because the thing, by hiding them, we're actually self-sabotaging. Like we're engaging and stuck in these loops. Right. So I know that was a roundabout answer, but it's more of that's kind of what it feels like for me, is like being willing to like take out your flashlight or your journal or whatever your tool is and get into the shadowlands and figure out like where things are coming from and why, and like are these stories I want to carry with me, or is this something I can put down because it's just not serving me?
Yeah. I mean, that takes so much vulnerability and honesty. I think it's radical honesty as well. And radical compassion comes in too, because I think when we go to parts of ourselves that we're not most proud of, that we feel maybe we did lie to ourselves, maybe we did manipulate, maybe it wasn't even like badly intentioned, you know,
yeah.
but we have to be compassionate that that's where we were at and that's the best we could do in the moment. And like an exercise I love is compassionate witness of what did you need then, and talking to your younger self, even if the younger self's like a week ago, what did you need in that moment that you didn't get, and can you give it to yourself, and like hug yourself and take their hand and walk away. And I find that so healing as well. But I love the part of like, not only like, let's focus on what I didn't get that I needed, but also like, what could I have done differently? You know, what can I put down that no longer serves me? And even if it wasn't the healthiest thing that served me then, it's okay. We don't need to shame ourselves.
Exactly.
You know,
it's like we did what we could do at the time because that's what we needed to do.
Right. So I love that. And I think that is, I mean, honestly, like that's pretty much what therapy is. You know, it's like shadow work. So,
yeah. And
it's just like, we don't call it that.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think there's so much value to doing it with a partner, and like having a therapist, having a coach, having like a psychiatrist like to kind of walk with you through that. But I know it's hard, and I'm sure you see this in your profession all the time, like it's not always accessible to people. And it's sometimes like there are also folks who, like, I've had amazing therapists in the past. I've had really crappy therapists in the past. And like, it's not always, especially with like the mental health crisis, I think as a country, we're kind of experiencing just in the way that we don't talk about it, we shame it, we put it in the closet, and then it's really hard to find sometimes your insurance to pay for something, someone who's got an opening, like it could be this like, whole thing that, especially if you've got high functioning depression, it seems so overwhelming. You're like, fuck it, I'm not even gonna go there. Like I'm gonna walk away from that thing. But there is a lot of work we can still do on our own. It's like, it's great to, I think both paths are valuable. And there's certain things that you can ask me about that I can go. I have to kind of still do the work on my own at the end of the day, as it is. So
yes, that's what I was gonna say too. It's like you can go to therapy, but showing up to therapy physically and showing up like emotionally, spiritually, mentally is a very different thing. Like a therapist can't wave a magic wand and make your problems go away. Like they can't go into your deeper psyche. They can't go into your past and peel back those layers. They can be there to help and support, but they can't do the work for you. So it like doesn't matter. Really, at the end of the day, you're the one who has to be committed to understanding yourself the best that you can, so that you can live a life that feels authentic, like you were saying.
And it's not even like, I always think of it too, there's always these layers of like the epiphany that you can have like in the session, in the moment. But then there's the embodiment of it. Like, what am I going to then do with that information? And some of those things are really easy to integrate and do right away. And sometimes it takes time and like re-experiencing that epiphany multiple times. But yeah, I think that's also the thing that I'm really like passionate about, is like, how do we bring these aha moments from the brain into our body and actually have it like radiate out into our outer world, like the way we interact with people, the way that we hold ourselves, like, how do we actually make that change happen?
Absolutely. And I mean, really what you do is healing as well, and it's helping. I think that's the goal of therapy. I think a lot of people come like, I want to get rid of my depression, I want to get rid of my anxiety. Like, you may not be able to do that. How can you understand yourself the best? Why is this occurring? And maybe sometimes the why you can't do anything about necessarily, like if it's genetic, but you can definitely manage it and understand yourself. So when something would take you into a deeper depression, there are tools you can use. Understanding yourself and how your body works, how your mind works, and I mean, I did a session with you for human design, and it was just like, oh my God, yeah, that's me, and like, I'm not going to get that in therapy because she doesn't do that, and just understanding this is how my body and brain function is really a useful tool.
It's a great thought experiment, because it's like, what if this is the blueprint, like the instruction manual to like how you are and why you are? Like, if you kind of allow yourself to kind of engage in that experiment, that process, like what can you then uncover and what questions can you ask yourself and like how can it benefit? I just think there's so many benefits to kind of just like following that yellow brick road to kind of see where it's going to lead.
Right. Thank you for that. And I know we got like a little bit off topic, but these are so interesting. I love talking to people who are like-minded, and that's going to help someone too, because I think there's just like, there's the stigma of therapy and working on yourself that you just go and do it like a worksheet, but it's like, no, like you have the keys in your hand to do it without any help, actually. Like the help might come from within, not necessarily outside.
Yeah. I mean, we can only so much of like, and it's funny because this is true in a lot of like kind of ancient and even pagan and Wiccan traditions, this idea of like, you are your own expert, you have to be your own guru, and like, you can't outsource what's right for you, what feels aligned. Like you have to kind of do your own discovery work. Like it has to be like radically empowered, or else, you know, and because what I observe in you, again, might be a projection. You might be doing what I was doing, would try to mirror me back in that way. And so it's like trying to kind of, it has to come from you.
So I guess what was difficult in your life, because you've obviously gotten to an amazing point in your life where you understand yourself, you're really helping people. Like, how did you get here? What was difficult for you to overcome and talk about that led you on this path?
It's funny. It literally was that kind of that mirroring behavior. So I know I kind of shared with you when we were talking. For years, when I left college, so I went to college for acting, actually. I did the whole theater thing. And actually, I quit it. I think it was like after my sophomore year. Because I remember writing in my journal at the time that I felt like I was spending so much of my personal life performing that I didn't have anything left when I went into class. Like I didn't, because they're like, it's you, but you in a certain set of circumstances. And I'm like, I don't know who I am. I'm constantly mirroring everyone back. So it ended up just not being the right kind of path for me. And I remember at the time being very like, I don't know what comes next. And so I remember I did Teach for America after college, because at that time I was like, okay, well, I'm really passionate about, inequities in education. I'm a giant book nerd. Like I'll go do this for a few years and I'll figure out, like, from there, I'll have an epiphany. I'll be in the city I want to be in. I'll figure it out. And what ended up happening was just a continuing of this pattern of outsourcing my decision making. Like I was around a lot of people who would say to me things like, oh, Jaclyn, you're really good at X. Like, this is your next step. Or, ooh, this is where we see you moving toward. And they seem so certain. And again, I was operating from a place of like deep insecurity that like and not knowing that I was kind of like, great, they seem really clear. I'll just walk in that direction. And 15 years later, I'm like leaving a career in education where I'm like, I mean, I enjoyed teaching teachers how to teach kids how to read when that was what I was doing, but my career ended up morphing into something that like I think was constructed for me. Not to say I wasn't responsible, like I'm not trying to outsource responsibility, but I think my responsibility was kind of buying into some of the systems and structures that we're conditioned to kind of buy into, like being in a corporate position where you have a certain title and a certain pay like grade. And I think that was something that when I realized how incredibly miserable I was and how sick I was, and how into like really terrible behavior patterns I was at the time. Like from the outside, I had been doing such a good job of projecting that I was successful that I think when it finally all came crashing down, other people were just like, what are you doing? Like, what are you throwing? You're throwing away a lot of stuff that maybe, pardon me, it's a little sniffly here. They looked at me like they didn't understand. I was like tossing something away that they perceived as valuable, but it actually wasn't something that I valued. And I think at that point I was kind of like, I don't know who I am outside of all these external things I've used to define myself, and I needed a tool that would get me there, right? And so flashing back, the other thing I was nerdy about as a kid was anything that was like, witchy, occult, esoteric, metaphysical. Like I was the kid in middle school who would like get the book on tarot and get the book on astral projection, but like hide it under Sweet Valley High. So like no one knew. And I thought I was being really slick. The librarian knew. The librarian's like, oh, you're the one reading books about Bigfoot and cryptids or whatever. Like I was that nerd. So now as an adult, like when I was kind of stuck and going, I don't remember who I am outside of, I needed a system, and astrology, human design, like those were things that were kind of like human design, the gene keys were new to me, but astrology and tarot were kind of like my gateways back into to kind of realigning with the self. And from there, it just kind of, human design ended up being like a perfect system to start asking myself those questions and really get back in alignment with my own decision making.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing.
It just ended up happening to be the thing I ended up doing. It wasn't the intent. The intention was this will help me figure it out. And then it's like, oh, this is also really helpful. Maybe I can help people with this.
Right. And so what was the struggle for you to talk about? Like, what conversation was hard for you, like, when you decided this isn't for me?
So, explaining to people why I had quit and what I was actually doing instead were funky, right? Like, I remember having a conversation even with my dad, and my dad is like the sweetest, super supportive. But I do remember at one point he was like, because I was blogging just about human design at the time, I just started to do readings. And I remember he asked me, like, so when are you going to get a real job? And I was like, what do you mean a real job? He's like, one with health insurance. And I'm like, I pay for health insurance. Like, it just, I think like the paradigm is so strong of like, you know, what a career is supposed to look like, or what a successful like work-life balance is supposed to look like. And one of the things I just uncovered from digging into my own design is I'm wired differently. Like, I'm wired to need to be in something that feels purposeful and fulfilling, but also kind of honors my work-rest ratio. And it just, I do better working for myself. And so, yeah, so kind of explaining to people why I left something that was like on paper so successful and lucrative that was actually killing me. Like, I was really at my sickest, like, and with all the kind of things that come along with the depression. Like, I think I shared with you, I had substance abuse issues, definitely a lot of like, again, seeking validation and like sexual relationships and things like that were not the healthiest. All of that was exacerbating, like, while I was that. So for me, it was the healthiest thing to go in this direction that seemed counterintuitive to so many people, but it was actually exactly what I needed. So trying to explain that was it's always like, that was a little funny.
Yeah, I can imagine. And since you were so used to outsourcing how you should feel, how you should act, were you worried about what people would think?
Oh, 1,000%. Like, there are still friends of mine to this day where I like will talk about my sobriety, and they're like, "Oh, you're sober?" And I'm like, I don't, like, because they knew me as that person who would like drink them under the table. I was constantly down for another shot. And like, but it was, again, me matching the vibration of the people that I was around, thinking this is the thing that would. So absolutely, like, there were having conversations with folks about identities I was shedding. And I also, again, like, as a kid, got that message, because I grew up Episcopal and Catholic, that like the, you know, astrology, tarot, et cetera, like, weren't okay. That was a whole, like, I always joke that I was in the broom closet for a very long time, like, not wanting to share that side of myself with people. That that even having those conversations, like, people were like, I'm sorry, like, I know you used to joke about wanting to, like, you know, say fuck it all and be a tarot reader, but like, now you're actually doing it. What it, like, they thought it was, because they were so used to seeing what I wanted them to see, which was a mirror of, you know. So yeah, having those conversations, actually kind of saying, no, this is what I believe in. And this is what and it's like the right people have been amazing and have adapted and have, you know, not walked away. And I've met some amazing people but then there's been a lot of shedding. There's been a lot of folks that have just kind of like exited stage left. And it's actually, you know, probably for the better, you know, not that I wish them ill, but it's just, you know, they didn't actually know me to begin with. It can't be a rejection.
Exactly. You know, it's like, if you didn't know yourself, no one else could have really known you.
Oh, absolutely. Even like, I think back to exes of mine, like so many of my relationships in my 20s, especially at my sickest, were me. I wanted them to like me so much that I don't think it really entered into my psyche of like, do I like them? Like, is that, so yeah, it was a lot of,
yeah. And I think for women particularly, it's always like, how can I win this guy's attention and affection? You know, and not to say in like LGBTQ relationships that doesn't exist, but I think we're like conditioned to be like, you need to be this way for some man to love you, you know, and have the happily ever after. And that's just so not true. Like, I don't think we even think about what we want in a partner. What do we want out of a relationship? And when I ask my clients that, they automatically go to the physical. Like, I want someone who, or like, I want someone who exercises, who has a lot of money and a good job, and, you know, and that's not wrong.
Yeah.
But it's like, is that's what's going to support you in a relationship? No. You know, it's like, it's compassion, it's honesty, it's, you know, empathy, emotional intelligence, and we just don't think about that at all. Like, I don't think I thought about that till I was like 35.
I know. And it's weird because our society also tends to like preference and privilege like getting married younger and having children younger, and like even like the way we kind of like romanticize the high school sweetheart kind of scenario. And again, if that's somebody's path and it feels aligned, that's great. But I think there's a lot, I can't tell you how many people I've known from the past who've like married the person because it was the time to get married, or taken the path because, and they're miserable now, or they're, you know, I just like, they're struggling and you can feel it. But again, there's this again projection of like, I'm okay, everything's okay, when maybe it's actually not.
Right. So it sounds like the struggle for you was to live your own life and to talk about what it feels like to authentically be Jaclyn Michelle, right? So
yeah. And some of the darker parts of that too, I think I tried, like if you would ask friends of mine, for example, does Jaclyn have a problem with drinking? Like, they probably would have been like, no. Oh, absolutely not. No, like, she looks like all of us. But I was so, like, I couldn't just have one drink. It ended up turning into 2, then 10. And, you know, and all of a sudden I'm blacking out, or I'm putting myself in really unsafe situations. And unfortunately, like, I went to a college where it was a big drinking school. Like, I went to Penn State. And so, like, you know, we always joke that we minor in alcoholism, but like, it's absolutely kind of did. And it, like, it's funny because I never was like physically addicted. Like, I know there's like degrees of, you know, but alcohol was like definitely my drug of choice. And I was constantly just like numbing, medicating, like, again, because it felt like I was funnier, or I was more accepted, or whatever it was. But again, it was a lot of just like covering up and numbing behavior and not actually dealing with what was there. Trying to kind of give the projection of like fun, sexy, you know, whatever. And so there's that, I think too, was the hardest part of all of this. Was I had made a career out of hiding all the fucked up stuff that was going on, that when I did start talking about it, it was like either deeply uncomfortable, or people thought I was maybe making it up or not, because it just wasn't a part of myself I had shared. So like my nearest and dearest knew, but
what was it like? Like, what was the benefit of having shared it after you did?
It just felt like like I could actually finally breathe, like in certain conversations, in certain spaces. I didn't feel like, it almost felt like a weight was lifted, because it's like, good, these are people I don't have to pretend with anymore, because they know, they understand, they're not going to force, they're not going to push, they meet me exactly where I am. And like, it was important to me too that as I built my business, that I didn't project either. Like, I wanted to be able to be like, to show fully as I was, like to be able to talk about my sobriety, or talk about, you know, and I think it actually has helped me a bit too, because I've definitely been like, I've had rock bottoms. I've had those moments of like waking up on a bathroom floor, vomit, and just like all of those things that made me realize like there's not much people can say to me anymore that can shock me, because of a lot of the, you know, not to play trauma Olympics either, because I know there's stuff that like is horrible and shocking, etc. But I think it's built my compassion and empathy and my ability to kind of hold space for people. So yeah, I think it's helped me put down this giant armor that I was carrying around. And now I'm actually having relationships where I feel like I'm meeting people in a way that actually feels authentic and feels, you know, connected in a way that I hadn't experienced before. So that's been really beautiful.
That sounds beautiful. I know it's like a weird question, but like, if you could, I guess, define in a feeling or how you knew when something doesn't feel authentic versus when it does, like, is there a feeling in your body? Is there a thought that comes to you? Like, how do you know?
So to bring it back to human design, this is actually one of the tools that I use to figure this out. In the system, I'm something called a generator, and I have something called sacral authority. So there's like 2 ways my body talks to me. I'm really good at getting gut feelings, like kind of instinctual, intuitive, like literally gastrointestinal, like tummy rumbles, not in the pit of my stomach. I've learned to actually listen to that. Because for years, I assumed like if I was getting an awkward feeling, it's because I'm an awkward person and I need to like overcome it, push it away, whatever it is. So I've gotten really good at honoring those messages and going, no, if my body's telling me something is off, something is off. But also my sacral, like in human design, our sacral center is our joy and our pleasure and things that we get to do. And I think I had never framed, like, for example, work for myself in that way. Mm-hmm. What are things I get to do versus what are things I have to do? And as I started rearranging my life, because I was lucky at the time, I had the privilege to be able to do so. I'd worked in sales for a while, and I'd actually been really good at it. And so I had like a nice little nest egg, and I was figuring myself out. But like really actually having those conversations with myself for almost like the first time, like what are something that feels joyful? What are things that I look forward to? And it was so different. Like my friends in New York, I always joke, it's almost like the journey from Jackie to Jaclyn. Like they knew me as someone who like my friend's husband once said to me, I don't think I've ever seen you in flats. Like I was constantly in a pair of heels. Like in New York City for a decade, stilettos, like boots, just platforms, walking, because I'm short, I'm 5'2". But again, it was like this need to be seen in a certain way, right? I'm barefoot now. Or I'm in a pair of hiking boots. I have like a pair of like little Sherpa lined mugs. Like what actually feels joyful to me is something that's very different than that. Like so it's been like a slow kind of unraveling of what actually feels joyful and pleasurable versus what do I think other people want, like perceive, value, etc. So yeah, just reframing it for that.
Right. Oh, so is there a feeling when you're doing it for other people, or maybe it's triggering trauma versus intuition? How do you know the difference?
Oh, dread. I get a deep feeling of dread of like, oh God, I don't wanna. Or I will catch myself sometimes like doing like, it's weird because so with myself and my heart both open in my chart, I notice that I will physically lean sometimes toward people when I'm mirroring. And like my body language kind of changes. And so if I notice myself leaning and then adapting some of I'll catch it now in a way where I think I didn't before. And I'll even force myself to sit back and kind of like, adjust myself in a way where, or get quiet too. Like I'm a talker, but I find that when I'm out of alignment, I try to fill the space. Like,
those are really good to know because I think one of the trickiest things that comes up with my clients and even myself is like, okay, and I have very strong gut feelings too. I think my intuition's like dead on a lot. But then I get caught up. Like I think a perfect example is like when you're driving somewhere and you know the area, but your Waze or your Google Maps tells you to go one way, but you're like, ooh, I should probably go this way because I know it's the back route, but I follow the Google Waze. That's like the outsource, right?
Yep.
And I'm always like, damn it, why didn't I trust my gut? So it's just like little things like that. And, I think you put into really good words. Dread is a really good signifier. When you have to question, is this mine or someone else's? Does someone want me to do this and I'm doing it to people please? Because I think a lot of what we're talking about is people pleasing too and looking for acceptance and belonging, which we're wired for. It's not wrong. It's
absolutely.
Just if you're always operating from a place of like, I don't want to disappoint someone else. Like it's okay if I'm disappointed. You're gonna have a lot of trauma. You're gonna have a lot of anxiety. You probably are prone to more depression because you're just not listening to yourself. And I think, honestly, a huge part of all these mental illnesses is we shut down our own voice.
1,000%. I mean, if you aren't willing to let people actually get to know you, like, then that's not actually a relationship, if that makes sense. Like, so I want authentic connections now and not things that are out of obligation or out of just like a perception that like I've constructed that's not actually real. Like I don't want to be a mannequin, I want to be a human.
Right. Yeah. Yes. And I say that all the time. I'm like, you're not a robot. You're a person. You're a human being. We are flawed. We are wired for connection. We are going to make mistakes. It's what did I learn from this? What am I getting out of this? And I think like we focus so much, and again, talking about the conditioning to be in a relationship with someone else, but like first we need to get into the relationship with us. We need to date ourselves. And it sounds like you did a fantastic job of doing that with yourself.
I've been dating myself since 2016. Like it's funny, like, and this is another thing I don't talk about a lot, and I don't mind sharing with you. Like, I'm celibate, and I've been celibate for a while, since 2016, specifically because I noticed these propensities in myself in terms of who I was picking and how I was behaving. And I'm like, just like you said, I need to date myself. I need to figure out who I am and, like, you know, take care of her. And, you know, once I figure that out, then I'll be ready for a partner. But I was like, I'm not going to be ready when all I'm doing is projecting. Like, that's going to trap me in a situation that's just not for me. I want something for me.
Yeah. And you should be so proud of, like, making that commitment to yourself, you know, and you're the only person who's going to know when you're ready, if you're ready. And it's okay to never be ready. You know,
And that's been fun too lately to kind of, I mean, it's funny. I was having the conversation with my grandmother a couple of years ago, my Irish Catholic grandma. I remember last time I saw her was like, do you need me to get you eHarmony? Like, is everything okay? Because I'm like I'm the oldest granddaughter. I'm the only granddaughter on her side. And like my brother's married and has kids. Like the rest of there's a big gap between my brother and the rest of like the grandboys, but they're all kind of on that path. And I'm just kind of like, I have 3 dogs. Like, I love my dogs. You have furry grandchildren, but it's not something like I actually right now don't know if I see myself partnered, but I also know that might change, and that's completely fine. I'm okay with it being whatever it ends up being. That's been the hard part too. Talk about hard conversations is explaining that to other people, because they treat it as if like, oh, that'll change, or oh, like it's you know, you feel that way now, but I'm like, or maybe I will always feel it, and that's okay. I'm totally cool with being like the old lady with her dogs. Like that's fine too. Yeah. Like it's like it's gonna be what it's meant to be.
Right.
I don't want to force it. I want to just like commit to kind of doing the work on myself, and then when I'll know if I'm and when I'm ready.
Right. And I think the huge thing that you're talking about is what you've really taken out of the what would you call it? The mix, if you want to call it that, is judgment, right? You stopped judging yourself, and you stopped allowing other people's judgment of you to impact your decisions. And that's the hardest thing you can do, because think about how many times, like, even you just saying, I'm a nerd, like, you're not a nerd. You're just very intellectual. You are inspired by things, of creating fantasy, of learning. Those are all positive things. And listen, I'm not saying, like, you can't joke around and say that, but it's like, we talk to ourselves so terribly and don't like, I don't know how many times I'm like, I'm so stupid I didn't do that. It's like, no, I'm not. I'm just human, you know? And if we could take the judgment of what we feel about ourselves, of what we feel about anything, it's okay if it's not what everybody else thinks. You know, it's okay if it's not what society tells you. And if everybody stepped away from what society, besides like killing people, you know, but like,
I mean, there are a few fundamental things that I think.
Right.
What helped me was there's this in my own kind of human design chart. There's this gate that has to do with like it's something that's activated in my chart that has to do with my relationship to control. And I started really investigating like, where do I try to control other people? Like, when is that veer into manipulation? Like, where is it even? And so I've been like really digging into how that shows up in different facets of my life. And I think one of the most freeing things was taking the weight off my shoulders of like, I don't ever get to control anybody else's perspective, anybody else's behavior, anybody else's like vision of me. Like, none of that is within my realm of my control. It never will be. And so once I really started to internalize that, that's when I started experiencing the drop in the judgment, the freedom, because it's like, oh, I was rereading Byron Katie last night, her Loving What Is. And one of the things she says, there's like my business, there's your business, and there's God's business, and like trying to figure out like where you kind of fall in that. And once I realized like I can't, it was like almost freeing. Like it was like, I don't control anybody else. Oh, this is great. Like, ooh. Now, like, and that was one of the things that helped me kind of release the judgment. So I've been actually playing with it in different areas of my life in terms of like years ago, I would never have like today I have a few inches of grays. Like my dad went like gray in his 20s, and I've just like been blessed with those genetics as well. And I would never have, I like, if you had met me 6 or 7 years ago, I would have canceled this call today because I have grays. and because I would have tried to micromanage your perspective of me, your perception, and like, so I've been playing a lot with appearance lately, and like what feels like an act of self-care, what feels like joyful, what's something that just doesn't feel like, am I okay with showing up in a certain way and still being myself? So like that's something I've been experimenting with a little bit more and kind of playing with what that feels like for me. But so that's been like the next frontier of just like, you know, well, what happens if I don't dye my hair for a few months? Like, how does that, is that something, can I still show up fully as myself and be cool with that?
Right.
Or am I going to like fall back into the whole, I got to manipulate how people see me, you know?
Well, I love that, because before this, I was like, I don't want to put on makeup, but I have to. And it's like, well, that's a great thing of like, okay, well, maybe next time I'll be challenged to like come on without makeup or doing my hair.
I think when we met for our calls, I had a bare face. This morning, every day I kind of literally look at because I have like a legacy collection of like, I'm talking like drawers and palettes and just, you know, it's a lot. Like Sephora and Ulta are like, they see me come in and they're like, oh, Miss Jaclyn, like it's bad. But I've gotten better over the years. And anyway, this morning, what I've learned to do is go, is it going to be something I get to do this morning, or is it going to feel like an obligation? And if it starts feeling like an obligation, I won't do it. But if it feels joyful, like this morning I was like, ooh, I'm really excited to play with this eyeliner today. Like, I don't know what it was. I was like, ooh, that feels good. So today it felt good. It may not tomorrow.
Okay,
like, yeah. So it's just, yeah.
Right. I mean, I literally only put makeup on to do this. So like, or if I'm going out in public.
Yeah.
Like, but that's,
and that was one of my literally like, okay, but that was another one of those kind of peeling back the layers of the onion moments I noticed for myself. Like, okay, one of the ways I try to manipulate is I try to perceive how I'm viewed by people. And like, what happens if I start surrendering some of those things? What does that look like? What does that feel like? And so, yeah, that's been an interesting place of play. I've been making it playful so it doesn't feel like a chore, you know?
Right. Well, I'm going to try that as well. I mean, I don't wear makeup often, but like, you know, I think when I'm going out to dinner, like maybe I could not, and let's see what happens.
Well, I think it depends on, like, for me, like it felt like I felt like it was an obligation. Like I couldn't go out, or I felt horribly uncomfortable, and it was like much more than just do I feel like it or not. It literally felt like part of just the way I was controlling. And I'm like, let me take that mechanism away and like play with that a little bit. How does that feel? So, yeah.
Well, I love the comment that I always hear. You never know who you're going to see. Well, what if they see me disheveled? It's okay.
Exactly. And if they're my person, they're going to think I'm as beautiful, like, you know, hair in a messy bun, 2 inches of grays. You know, that shouldn't be the thing that, you know,
Right.
Because we're all going to age. But, we all, you know, have our moments, you know.
And who's like put together 24/7? It's not realistic,
you
know? And just even hearing you say that, I do it because I'm like, well, I don't want someone to think like I'm not put together, or, you know, like, and it's such a stupid reason to do it. Like, what do I care what someone else thinks of me that I don't even know?
Yeah. The random lady at the grocery store, like the person at Starbucks does not, I don't like need to, you know, exactly. Yeah.
Right. Well, I love that. And it helps you to take pause and be like, okay, like, I need to do things for me, not for others. And that is such a good, I don't think anybody really often not anybody, but it's rare that people stop and think about like kind of everything we're talking about. What do I want in a partner? What do I want in a marriage? What do I want for myself? What do I, you know, want other people to think of me? It's like, do I need that? Right? I need to honor myself first. And I think you've modeled so incredibly how to do that. So you should feel really proud, and you're helping people to understand themselves. And I think if everybody could get on board with that in whatever way feels authentic to them, because there's not one way to do that. It could be therapy. It could be human design. It could be psychics. It could be journaling or a self-help book.
There's so many different pathways like to do this work. And it's so funny because like human design gene keys, they're fantastic tools, but I also, like, as soon as I have to explain to someone, like, there's another hard thing to talk about. Oh, it's a channeled system. People are, like, immediately shut down. They're like, nope, I don't want to. And I'm like, you know that the Bible is a lot of it is written by prophets. Like, this is, you know, so it's not that this is unheard of or there's no precedent. But, again, like, I get where the stigma comes from, because I think we're, again, conditioned as a society to value evidence, to value, like scientific inquiry. And there's amazing stuff that's come from that. But there's also things that we can't explain. And I think we need to keep the yes and, not the either or. But it's been a really powerful tool for me. And I always tell people too, you do not need to believe in the origin of the system to experiment with it, play with it, and like take wisdom from it.
Right. And what I liked about yours is that you put everything in like, not in jargon. You like talk to someone like they're a person. And I wholeheartedly believe that. I do that in my practice. Like, I'm not going to sit here and talk to you like you've studied psychology. You didn't. Or maybe you did, but you're still a person and you deserve to be treated that way in every aspect, you know? So I really liked that and valued that about you. Thank you so much for coming on. I love to like end with, if you could talk to yourself 10 years ago, or if there's a piece of advice you could give someone out there listening, what would it be? Oh
God, a piece of advice I could give someone. Get a birth chart reading. From my lived experience. I think one thing human design has taught me is we learn the lessons we're meant to learn when we're meant to learn them. And so because I think like one of the things I used to say to myself when I first found human design was, why didn't I know this 10 years ago? My life would have been so different. I wasn't ready to hear it 10 years ago. Like I almost had to put myself in those situations, be in those dark places, or I wouldn't have the compassion, the empathy that I have right now. Like I think that I wouldn't be able to do for other people what I do right now. So I feel like a lot of times, like we can only be where we are in this moment. And so like the knowledge you need is going to come to you when it does. Like you just have to be open and ready to receive it. And like, so I think it doesn't, that Monday morning quarterbacking doesn't really like, I mean, the game was Sunday. There's nothing we can do about it. So it's like, how do you deal with what you have right now? And how do you get really radically present with yourself? And like, find those tools that are going to speak to you that help you move forward. Like, and if you can treat everything kind of like every person you meet's a teacher, you know, every book you read is a potential teacher, every conversation you have, like, what can I learn from this? If you just like put yourself in the seat of the eternal student, like that's where the magic happens.
And learning to just tolerate your feelings, even if they're hard in the moment, and being patient. I think we do not have patience. We're a society of immediate gratification, myself included. And, you know, I think that is the hardest thing, is to really just wait and receive and take all your experiences and try and learn something from them. I love that. And thank you so much. And if you want to tell people where they can find you and if they want to get a human design or every service that you offer. So please let everybody know.
So I'm on Instagram at Interior Creature. The website is interiorcreature.com. One of the things I'm really passionate about these days is building community around doing this work. I'm actually teaching probably by the time this is live, it'll be over, but I'm teaching a workshop this weekend about how we actually use like the cycles and the rhythms of the year, like astrologically, to do this work. Because it's like, why don't we work with the rhythms of the universe and not against it? So like when the sun is transiting the specific gate, it's a great time to do inquiry around X, Y, or Z. So we're gonna be looking at like what 2023 brings us, just the rhythms of the cosmic weather for the next year. So I'm really passionate about like doing this work in community, because so much of it has to kind of be done by yourself, but it's been really beautiful to come together, you know, as a group of people who are compassionate, who are like-minded, who are all on the same journey, to kind of share like, oh, here's an epiphany I had this week when I was working through this specific gate, or, oh, I noticed this thing with the way I'm not listening to my sacral, or whatever it is. Like the ability to hold space for each other in that way has been really beautiful. And I think it's something that hasn't existed before. Like a lot of times in coaching programs, and I always struggle with the word coaching, there's a hierarchy. There's kind of like this person who like is the teacher and the wisdom, and then there's the students. Like we're really doing a hierarchical kind of model where we're sitting in circle, we're sitting in community, and like we all have different things to bring to the table and different things to share. And I think though I've learned so much from the community, as much as like, you know, so anyway, it's been, so I have a few different communities. There's Karmic Studies, there's the Catalyst community, like that you can kind of pick from if you want to join me in any of those containers. I'd love to have you and teach you all about your design.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. It's fascinating. Thank you for being vulnerable and sharing all that. And I think it's definitely going to help someone out there, if not many people. And just keep doing what you're doing, because it's healing. And Thank you so much for listening. Stay tuned for another episode soon. And thanks for listening and tuning in. Bye.